Hello, everybody. This is the Undead Viking Lance Meister. I'm coming from my gaming dojo in Minnesota, where it actually was kind of nice today. I am joined today with two of the brilliant minds, hard at work all the time over at Frog God Games. I have my old friend Christopher Haskins.
Hello.
And my new friend, Tom Noss. I did spell that correctly, right? It isn't Knos or something like that, is it?
It is Knaus, actually.
It is Knos.
I was about to say that. I said, oh my god, but everybody does that, so please don't worry about it.
All right, so, okay, Tom Noss. The reason why I wanted to talk to you guys today is, it just seems like the minds over at Frog God Games, they've always got a cool new Kickstarter going on to put out another giant source book or adventure book or something full of like great old school feel adventures and campaign source books and what have you that are for the newer systems. They're for Pathfinder, they're for 5th edition, and like Swords and Wizardry, which is an old school system, but they're for like the new systems, but it maintains that awesome old school feel. The reason why Frog God Games is here is obviously it was built on the shoulders of Necromancer Games, which was like a big deal for me back in 3rd edition. So with Quests of Doom 3, which is a big giant source book with a bunch of awesome adventures, I wanted to take a chance to just talk to you guys about that. And Tom, you had your hand in writing like almost half of them, right?
I wrote 4 of them, and I also did the first stretch goal was also mine, from Fields of Blood. Yeah.
For Fields of Blood, and so you say from Fields of Blood. So what's Fields of Blood, or go over what's like Dunes of Desolation and things like that. Explain what you're referencing when you say those.
Okay. Frog God Games has a line of products called Perilous Vistas, and it started with Dead Man's Chest, which was before I came on board. That was a 3.5 product that was later updated to Pathfinder. So I've done the Dunes of Desolation, which is the desert source book, which includes a lot of deserty things, includes hazards you find in the desert, feats, spells, archetypes, actual real-world stuff on desert. So people have actually asked me, can I use this for my school project about deserts? And I said, sure, you can do it. It's all pretty realistic. So then there's Fields of Blood, which is about grasslands. After Fields of Blood is Mountains of Madness, which is mountains, and that's pretty different than the other ones. It's still a source book on terrain, but it's also more Lost Land centered, and it's fairly long. It's longer than the other ones. And then the current one I'm doing is actually on the wetlands, swamps, fens, bogs, and marshes. So,
wasn't there one for like glades of something too?
Blades of Death, yes, was for forests. It was never updated though to Pathfinder. It's still a 3.0 product, so we haven't really included it in the quote-unquote Perilous Vistas yet. But it does have the similar format to those other products. It just was never updated.
Who wrote that?
There were like a number of people on that. I believe the main one was Lance Haverstrom, if I'm not mistaken.
He's got a good name.
And I think Patrick Longer wrote some of the adventures in that one, but I'm not too. Chris might know more than that about me.
I'll get that information for you right quick here.
Well, amazingly, somehow you're hooked up to the internet and you could probably figure it out pretty quickly. But while he's looking that up, so you wrote like so I gotta ask. So you wrote like let's just take Dunes of Desolation. So
okay.
you had a campaign source book. You had a book. You're talking about deserts. Was that something where like you wrote the adventures or had the ideas for the adventures first, and then you wrote the stuff about deserts, or was it something that kind of organically created each other, or?
No, it was actually when I got involved with Frog God Games, it actually got pulled in through Razor Coast. It's kind of a funny story. I started out in like 2000 in this industry, and I was doing a lot of PDF stuff. I was doing stuff for small things. I did something for Atlas Games. I did something for Mongoose Games. And then I got involved with Bastion Press. And at the time, I was actually the line designer for the Oathbound campaign setting. And before that, I had written these like environment books, Into the Green, Into the Black, which was forest, which was then underground. And I got out of it for a while, but when I first started Bastion, I had wanted to do a book of curses. And so I told Jim Butler, who was the owner, I said, I really want to do this book of curses. He says, oh, it's pretty funny you say that because I have a manuscript sitting on my hard drive written by this guy named Tim Hitchcock. And Tim was like starting out at the time, and he says, it would be really great if you could help him out with this book and look at it and see what you can do. So I looked at it, and I was like, wow, this guy's really incredible. So actually, it turned out that I live in North Jersey. He lives in New York. So we were able to meet up, and I worked in the city at the time, so we would meet up after work, talk about the book, and got to become pretty friendly. And I got out of the industry for a while, and I actually reached out to him, and I said, is there anything I could do? And he says, oh, yeah, I could put you on this project for Razor Coast, which was Frog God Games. Got involved in that, and then from there, they asked me if I wanted to do an environment book, which I had done previously. And at first, I was like, oh, man, I really want to do Lost Lands. I want to do some big campaign thing. And I said, sure, I'll do it. That's cool. So it started from there, and then I really developed the outline from the previous books, from Glades of Death and Dead Man's Chest. So it was pretty much a similar format. I tweaked it here and there, but the adventures came at the end. So I did the bulk of it first, and then I did the events.
I gotcha. So, so when you're writing an adventure, I mean, like, so whenever I think, and this is, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too far, but whenever I think desert adventure, my mind immediately goes to B4, the Lost City or whatever, the classic old with the purple cover, with the guys that get lost in the desert and they find the top of the pyramid, and then they go down and they find everything.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, I remember I must have ran that 20 times when I was a kid. But that was never. But I mean, that had like that adventure. They had a situation where the people had run out of food, and so your thing was you had to find food and water by going into this pyramid. But it wasn't like. It wasn't really in the desert. I mean, you weren't out in the elements. You weren't dealing with sandstorms or whatever like that. And so, with these adventures that you have, like that you wrote for like this Dunes of Desolation book, I mean, is it something where they're dealing with the environment as a hazard as well as, beasties and monsters and traps and tricks, or how did you go about writing those?
There's a mixed bag of that. Like the first one is Child's Play, which is in Quest of Doom 3, and that's more of takes place in a desert culture, but it's not really out in the desert. It's all pretty much indoors, so that really doesn't have too much of it. The other two do, though, and they both appear in Quest of Doom 3, which is going to be King of Beasts and My Blue Oasis, which kind of have a lot of that. There's a long trek through the desert in both of them. And granted, they're higher level, so they're like 8th level and 12th level, so there's not too much, oh my god, I don't think we're going to have enough water and food because we can cast these spells that can create it. So, you really couldn't do too much of that, but you could do some of, the more exotic stuff, sandstorms. There's actually this nasty thing that people don't realize is that if you wear shoes in the desert, that the environment is so corrosive that it'll actually eat through your shoes. So you can really mess with people that way too. Sunburn.
Whoa. Is that like a real thing? Is that
Yes, that is a real world thing. If you actually wear shoes in the desert for too long, what will happen is because the sand is so corrosive, over time it will eat through your shoes. Now it'll take a while, so don't expect it to be a day or two. But
so what do people wear in the desert then if they're not wearing shoes?
Well, they wear sandals, but you can always, mix it up too. You always have a couple pairs on hand if you were going to do that. So.
Okay, wait. I'm calling you out on this. So it's so corrosive, it's because it's coarse, because like the actual material is like gritty and it tears up your shoes, or is there like something in the sand that actually?
That's part of it. It's also mostly though because it tends towards being like a base, like a detergent. The sand's actual its chemical properties that it will actually eventually corrode through your shoes.
Mm-hmm. I had no idea.
Yeah, it'll take time. Believe me, it took me like weeks to research some of this stuff. So it was like kind of mind-boggling some of these things you found out about, how the desert really works. And if you think it's easy to type in a search on Google and say desert survival, it's not. It's really hard. You ended up finding like obscure field guides by some guy who was in the military in Kuwait or in Iraq or something telling you this kind of stuff. So
well, I mean,
it was pretty interesting.
So what else did you find out that was really weird or cool about the about the desert?
I'm trying to think. That was the weirdest thing. Was the sand itself. There was also some things about how water is kept. In certain parts of the desert, there's things called wadis, which are very deep underground reservoirs of water that only spring up if like there's this occasional downpour. Like there are parts of various deserts around the world where they will get rain, but it will come in this absolute downpour. It'll be a giant deluge, and these wadis retain this water for long periods of time, but they're deep underground, so you may have to, dig a well 30, 40, even more than that feet down below to get access to the water. So that was pretty cool. That was pretty neat.
Okay, and then so Fields of Blood.
Yeah.
Also something you wrote. So you're gonna tell me that like what grasslands like you gotta like mow your yard a lot, or what's the
giant bugs in them.
Giant bugs.
So no, with that, and actually, just taking a quick step back. So if somebody wanted to get like Dunes of Desolation and Fields of Blood, those are still in print, right? You can get them through like the Frog God website, correct?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but with Fields of Blood, I mean, so what were you like? I mean, obviously, like it's not as harsh, obviously, of an environment. So what more was your focus there? I mean, because it just seems that seems like it would be. I don't mean to be rude here, but that would be kind of dull as compared to like you think of a marsh or a wetlands. You're like, oh, okay, that's cool. It's all you're in a bog and you got gases and you're in a desert and the sun's baking you and even like so you have those cool ideas, but with I mean it's grasslands. I mean, woohoo!
Actually, when I first started writing that, somebody told me that. They said I was at Gen Con and I was sitting down. I can't remember. It was one of the parties, whether it was a Were Cabbage party or something else, and somebody said, "You're writing a book about the plains? Oh my God, it's so boring. Who's going to be interested in it?" But it's actually a lot neater than people think. There's actually things called black blizzards. Most people probably never heard of them. I'm sure people have heard of the Dust Bowl in the 30s. That's what a black blizzard is. When you get the grassland and you cut it, you actually use it for farmland, but because it's so arid that over time, if you have a prolonged drought and you don't use like very good farming techniques, the soil will actually turn to dust. And black blizzards like devastated the United States for almost a decade between the 30s and the 40s. So that was one pretty cool thing. I actually wrote rules for ticks, like tick-borne diseases, mosquito-borne diseases, snakes. There were a lot of different, it's not, but there's a lot of tornadoes in the grasslands. I mean,
I know. I live in the upper Midwest, so every summer, we get a few bad storms, and at least once a year the tornado sirens go off because we got circular motion going above us, so everybody else is supposed to crawl in their basement and hope for the best.
Yeah, so there's tornadoes. There's also weather tables, and they're actually extremely accurate. I actually based them on 3 locations in the world. I actually got the weather charts for them, and I believe one was Wichita, Kansas, for like prairies, and one was for savannas. I took a place in Zimbabwe that actually had weather charts, and the steppes I actually took one from Mongolia. So there are some extreme weather in those, and as you know, in the Midwest it can get extremely hot in the summer, and it can get pretty windy, and likewise in the steppes it can get extremely cold. So that was another facet of the book as well. So it actually turns out that the grasslands are pretty cool. There are a lot of neat things in there, weather-wise, that people don't take into account when they think of grassland.
Well, this is a topic a lot of people never bring into their games, is weather and the environment conditions. and I always end up with a storm coming in, or it's super hot, or it's a nice day, and I change the weather up during my game sessions if it's going to be a long 2-week journey or something, so that there's something else besides just monsters that the players have to deal with, and they may end up with illnesses and stuff if they don't have good places to sleep, or if they're sleeping out in the open and it starts to downpour and stuff, their body temperature drops and seriously ill. And that's something that my players always tell me is really cool to have in the game, so that it's not just we're going from dungeon to dungeon slaying a bunch of monsters. Instead, there's actual real fear of not being well enough provisioned between your different places, and an importance to get to a town and have a safe place to sleep in an inn, for example. So this kind of aspect, bringing this into your adventure, I think, is really fun for the players.
Well, yeah, I think it's the immersion factor. I mean, it's just instead of just, and we've talked about this before, Chris. I mean, you have to get people beyond the character sheet. You have to think of that person as kind of an entity and give them, feelings. It's so easy to say, oh, I've got a bedroll and a blanket, I'm fine. It's like, no, it's 30 below. You are miserable. You are absolutely miserable. And you're not going to feel great tomorrow. Clanging, putting on cold metal and delving into the dungeon.
We had a game at one point where they were headed north into basically blizzard territory and stuff, and I said to somebody, you're probably going to need gear for that, and they were like, oh, we didn't even think about that, and they outfitted the entire group with yaks for outfits and stuff to keep them warm while they were up there. And someone ended up getting dunked in the ocean at one point during the adventure, and it was everybody's priority to get that person warm again after that, because they were going into hypothermia and stuff because there was snow on the ground and it was cold. There was a really cold wind and stuff. They actually ended up doing that spell where you make I think it's called rope trick in the 5th edition version. You make a rope. It takes you up into a 10 by 10 or 15 by 15 space, and basically they lit a fire in there, and everyone got warm and stuff. So I mean, it was neat. Adding that extra adventure element, I think, really adds to the game and makes people remember the adventure as being a really difficult adventure, as opposed to being, it was no big deal, we went in there, we killed the dragon, and we're fine. Instead, just getting to there, just the journey can be quite arduous. But let's bring things back away from away from.
Well,
before this hangout started, Lance was like, "You're the guy who's in charge of keeping us on point." And I was like, "Okay, good luck." But side note, Glades of Death was written by Patrick Loinger and Jeff Harkness, as well as Gary Schotter. So there you go. Those are the authors of that. So yeah,
Quest of Doom 3. It's only got a few days left, but it's a continuation. But what goes into and I know, Chris, you've written adventures too. So, but I mean, what goes into because every DM's written an adventure. I mean, you get out the piece of graph paper, you draw your stuff, you get things rolling, and then maybe you sprinkle a few monsters in there, or you just have a good idea of what you're going to be doing. But to make a professional adventure, I mean, I see the amount of work that goes into it. I mean, it's just what is it? What's the steps? What I mean, do you have a basic idea? Do you have a plot running through your head, and then you start slotting in the creatures and the maps and what have you, or how do you go about that, Tom?
It usually starts out with a very simple premise, and then I kind of expand it from there. I really work outward. I really try to set my adventures in some really weird places that other people don't set them in. For example, I'll give you the perfect one is Child's Play. Child's Play really started with a silly idea during their game session where one of our players said, I'm tired of places being so dank and dismal. Why can't they be happy and cheery for once? And I said, you know what? That's a pretty darn good idea. So I figured, all right, where do I set it? I'll set it in a dollhouse, in a child's dollhouse with little unicorns and little girls drinking tea and blah, 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 and all that. And then from there, I said, okay, now I need the story for how this dollhouse came into creation. So then I said, well, I can wish a dollhouse into creation, and a genie's really good at wishing things, but he can only wish for somebody else. So now he has to trick them into wanting to wish for to live their life out in this dollhouse. So he would bring in indigents off the street, have them live in his palace, which was an exact replica of the dollhouse, and then say, wouldn't it be great if you could spend the rest of your days here? Why don't you wish for that? And they wish for that, and voila, they end up in the dollhouse. So I really start with, it depends. Sometimes I start with the setting. Other times I start with the, I don't want to say the main character. Other times I start out with just an idea. Actually, for the second Wetlands adventure, last night my wife and I were out and we were smoking the hookah. I have to admit that, but it's very relaxing. I'm sitting there and I'm like, God, I got to come up with an idea for this adventure. And she's like, she shows me food porn on her phone, and I'm like, if I want to see porn, I don't want to see food porn, okay? Don't show me that on your phone. And then it hit me, food. And then that came with the idea for the second adventure for this, how I would do it. So it really starts like that. I really don't have like this whole plot mapped out. It's usually something very simple, like an idea, like a character. And then from there, I just fill in the rest of the blanks as I go along. So that's usually the method I use. I know everyone doesn't. I know a lot of people do outlines. On the outline, you know, you're going to go here, 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 da-da-da-da. I usually don't like doing that. I would prefer just starting with a simple idea, and then I build outwards from there, and kind of like, it's like starting a Lego. Just put one piece down, and I just keep putting more pieces on.
Oh, I like that metaphor. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to steal that. I'm going to use that at some point.
Oh, that's cool. Hey, feel free.
So when you're building it, then I mean, is it just like, is it something where, I mean, do you draw the maps or do you give an idea for the map? I don't know what goes into making a professional adventure. I mean, do you give like a rough idea of the map and then somebody that's like a good map maker takes over and makes that for you, or how does that roll?
My artistic abilities end at a stick figure, so I can't draw anything if my life depends on it. So what we do is, I typically, if I have like a building in mind, like I'll give you a bit of a spoiler for the second adventure in this Wetlands book, the setting is going to actually be a medieval fishery, and I know nobody has ever done that. So I'm actually looking up stuff online to see what a medieval fishery actually looks like. And then from there, I'll draw the map, and then we turn it over to an actual cartographer who does the actual maps. I do the rough map, but from what my rough map looks like to what his map looks like is a huge difference. Awesome. So mine's really more just for scale than anything else. So
I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know that we're all busy people, but I mean, so your first stretch goal, you have these 4 that were in, that were both, that were Pathfinder adventures, and now you guys are transferring over to 5th edition and Swords and Wizardry. But you have this stretch goal adventure. Tell me a little bit about that you've been working on. What's the name of that, and where is it based, and what's the premise of that one?
Okay, that one is actually Red Wedding, and I wrote it actually before the Game of Thrones episode.
Liar! You totally stole it.
I did. All right, I will admit the cardinal sin of game designer, other than The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, I have never read a fantasy book, ever.
What?
Well,
serious.
Okay, I'm sort of on that same boat with Tom, and one of my biggest problems with most fantasy that I pick up, like we have a used bookstore in Santa Cruz, and I'll go in there and I'll flip through some of the pages of some of these books, and they start out with way too much thrown at you. And so I think, having read The Hobbit as a kid, it was so simple and so easy. It's definitely a great book, and everyone should read it. So beyond that, what do you really need besides that, Lord of the Rings, in my opinion? But yeah, go ahead, keep going.
Wait a minute, no Lion Witch in the Wardrobe, no Dragonlance novels, no.
No.
All right, I don't know if I believe you or not, but I'll let it slide. All right, so go
Actually,
ahead. So
I'm in the same boat. I'm
go
in the
what?
same boat. I was actually an English major in college, so.
Oh,
I,
fair
I
enough.
read adventure books. I
Well,
read adventure
did
books.
you like
That's yeah.
perhaps read Beowulf? Then if you were a English major in
Yes.
college, you read Beowulf. I mean, that's fantasy, admittedly ancient fantasy, but
I read the Fairy Queen too, which was some fantasy elements to it. But it was difficult. So actually, Red Wedding started with an idea, and this is what I was talking about before with building idea. I wanted to start an adventure at a funeral because I remember so often when I first started in this industry, there were these like several do not do's. Do not start an adventure in a tavern. Do not save the princess. Do not destroy the magic ring. So I really avoided that. So I said, you know what? I want to start an adventure at a funeral. So I said, okay, let me have the funeral speech, and then I built the story from there. Well, whose the funeral is it? And it's a funeral of the mayor's daughter, and the mayor's daughter was murdered the night before, and he gives this rousing speech. I will not stand, for this, and I demand adventurers to come forth and solve this ghastly crime and so forth. So it starts off as a bit of a crime story, trying to figure out what it is. And it turns out, I don't want to give too many spoilers because I don't know if the players are listening.
no
Don't do it.
spoilers, no spoilers.
No spoilers. So I won't give any spoilers out, but it turns out that everything is not as it appeared.
Of course.
And there's other things going on behind the scenes. And actually, it had to get toned down a little bit because the main big bad evil guy was so bad that even the orcs had enough of him, and they disposed of him. So it was actually the most fun adventure I had to write. I really liked doing it, and I think Bill actually likes it a lot. I remember when I sent it to Bill Webb, he wrote back to me and was like, "Oh my God, this is so great! I can't believe, this is an awesome adventure." So I was like, "Oh, cool. Bill Webb likes it. Wow, I must have really made it now." So, but
Yeah,
it's a really good adventure.
Well, what was, I mean, not to sub-reference here, but wasn't there was an adventure? I can't remember what it was. Is it the Crystal Skull that was Necromancer Games? Like, and then it opens up with the fact that they find a murdered child, and then that's like the impetus of the adventure, if I remember correctly. And it's a very grim, very dastardly, fairly high-level adventure. If you can, I know you can get the PDF off of the Frog God Games website, but I mean,
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I don't remember.
no, I mean, I'm just pulling out of my brain, and maybe
Okay.
Chris is.
Crystal Skull? I'm going through stuff right now. That was before my time. Just
And
caveat.
I mean,
But-
it might be one of those adventures that's really tough to find. It's like it was one of those things that it got printed, and of course then they lost it or whatever. During that whole when Necromancer Games kind of vanished, and then it ruminated for a while, and then Frog God Games rose from the ashes of it. But I mean,
here you go. Here you go. Dave Broman's Crystal Skull. So it may not be available on their website, but it may have been. It may have been absorbed into something else, but let's take
actually,
a look.
It got absorbed, and it's actually one of the adventures in the big source book for the Lost Lands.
Cults of the Sunder Kingdom.
Yeah, Cults of the Sunder Kingdom. It's in there. There you go. Yeah, and that's so you told me that, Tom, and I was drawn to the idea. That's a great idea. I gotta read that adventure. I mean that sounds amazing. I mean that's just yeah. I mean it kudos. I mean just like you explained just a tiny little bit, and that's a great hook. I mean because think of all the things you could do. You could have the adventurers just happen to be coming into the town, and why is the tavern closed? Oh, there's a funeral. Well, why is there a funeral? And oh man, that's good. What level of adventures is that one for?
That is for fourth, the fourth level adventure. So fourth, you could probably do third or fifth, so I'll be fine.
Even low level guys too, so they don't have access to all kinds of weird I always dislike it when they have you have some mystery or secret, and they're like, oh, I'm going to cast commune, and I'm going to ask my god, so did he do it? Just
yeah, that's always a danger in an investigative adventure. But I do put a lot of tips in there on how to answer questions, because people usually go to things like discern lie or I'm going to sense motive on everybody talking to me. And I actually give you tips on how to get around that by saying things like, instead of saying, most people won't come to the point and say, "Did you kill so and so?" They'll say, "What do you know about it?" And this person will then say, "Well, I heard that blah 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 happened." So that way they're not really lying; they're just telling you what they heard. So they're not outright coming to say that kind of thing. So I really give a lot of tips on that. I actually did an adventure for O1 Games last year called Murder a la carte that was similar to that. And I actually gave a lot of tips in that on how to defeat those kind of spells by not saying something outright, not outright lying, just omitting details or saying that, yes, that's what everyone says, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, you're right. You can't get to like 9th, 10th level and have that because people will just go, all right, I'll commune, divination, augury, well, not augury so much, but divination, stone tell, legend lore, bum, bum, bum.
Yeah.
Now I know everything. Thank you very much. So
I'm running into I've been running a campaign, Swords and Wizardry campaign now for a little over 2 years, and my characters have they've slowly crawled themselves up to 9th and 10th level, so they've actually been pretty accomplished, and they're actually starting to kind of figure out the outside world, and the people that they used to rely on as patrons now they're kind of they're powerful enough to know that maybe some of them aren't exactly what they were to begin with, and so I'm running into a problem where like they're starting to investigate these movers and shakers of the world, and coming up with ways to instead of just saying flat out you don't know that or I'm not going to tell you that, I have to come up with like something clever as to why, if they are asking their god, why wouldn't the god know if this guy was trying to assassinate them, and I have to come up with some ridiculous excuse like he has a deity of his own that's his patron that's commanding him to do this, and so then that deity is able to subterfuge it away and all these things, and of course I'm a firm believer in ignorance and fear being the two most powerful things you can have over the players. But there's a level where like they flat out ask you, well, I should know this, why don't I know this, and you're like, I don't know, because it wouldn't be fun if I just gave you the answer. How about that?
Yeah. Well, some of these spells, like you mentioned, Tom, are just complete plot killers, and sometimes I think that the one that I'm thinking of, I think it was called Divination in 5th edition, where basically they sacrifice some object and they can have you give them an answer to a question. But you can phrase it in different ways, and the few times that has happened in our game, I've phrased it so cryptically that they could have interpreted it in a bunch of different ways. But the most logical way to interpret it was, this way, which may be, pretty much on track. But then again, they're so scared that it could be, this other direction, like they don't even want to pursue what I actually told them. So then, most of the time your players actually write the story with their own, nervousness about whatever's going on. I'm the type of DM who, I don't just kill people outright if they don't do the right thing, like they're walking to a dungeon and there's a trap and it just like squashes them and splatters their blood everywhere. I'm not that kind of DM. I'm the kind of DM that will let them walk themselves right into the biggest trap and end up getting killed because of it. Not just there's an arbitrary trap or there's an arbitrary 50 orcs around you or whatever. I'll just let them basically make their own story, and so my players have gotten the hang of it now and realized, oh, if I act dumb, I will probably kill myself.
So you're old school light is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, because we have a continual campaign, and nowadays we've been doing little one-offs because we've been writing little one-off adventures every month or so. So we've been playtesting those. We did one last night, and it was awesome. But it's really interesting to see how much you can give them this much information, and between the 5 or 6 players that you have, they create so much story around it, and you're just sitting behind the screen like, okay. That's fine. You want to think that.
Yeah, there's nothing better than watching them either swallow the red herring that you've put out there, and then they just take it like it's the golden goose and run with it, or watching them just completely, go down the rabbit hole and like, you might as well just throw whatever you had prepared out the window and just let them well, if we burn the village, then they can't. You're like, all right, well, let's just.
If we burn the village, we complete the quest by default, right?
Yeah.
No, that's not the way it works.
Well, final question for both of you, I guess, but this is something I always wonder. Would you rather play or would you rather run the show? Would you rather be behind the screen or would you rather be the playing in the field, so to speak?
I'll let Tom go first.
I'm going to say I would rather be running the stuff from behind the screen. If it's my own stuff, if it's somebody else's, then it's harder.
Well, yeah, you enjoyed the hell out of that game last year at the Texas convention. You were role playing like crazy at my game. So.
Yes, that was fun. I had a good time. I had a good time being a total jerk, and that fit really perfectly for me. So I don't know why.
Yeah. We were playing the basically second chapter of the starter set for 5th edition at the North Texas RPG convention, and basically I just grabbed a bunch of people who weren't playing, and I said, "You want to play?" And they said, "Sure." And I had all the maps, the minis, and everything. We threw it all on the table. We just ran with it, and it was actually one of the funnest ones we'd ever done. Dawn was there, and Wolfgang Bauer was there. It was you, Tracy, Wolfgang, Dawn, and I think one other person. And why am I forgetting the other person? Anyway, it was super fun, but you had a good time being a player. I mean, you were definitely a good player. But it sounds like you'd rather be behind the screen. As would I, tell you the truth, because whenever I play with people, well, most of the time when I play, I can't disconnect from the dungeon mastery side of me. Just like when I watch a movie, I can't not think about the special effects that went into creating that scene. So I don't have nearly as much fun as I could, you know what I mean? So I definitely find myself behind the screen a lot more than I find myself, with the party. And the times that I do play with the party, I'm a player, I have a lot of fun, and I like to think that I add a lot to the party, but I definitely find a lot of like plot holes and shortcomings and stuff with people's adventures that I don't mention, but the whole time I'm like, well, but that really doesn't make any sense because of this, or that, or what, something that was said earlier. So because I'm constantly critiquing my own work, I try to weed all those whole, I try to get all that out of the adventure before I take it to the game. And but all in all, like you can be a pretty bad critic on other people's stuff. I try not to be, but I personally have always really enjoyed DMing, and I would say I'm 80% of the time I'm DMing, 20% of the time I'm playing.
Yeah, it's about the same for me too. So if somebody wants to go check out Quests of Doom or Dunes of Desolation or Fields of Blood, where should they go?
Well, if you want to get a hold of any of the published material, like Fields of Blood or Dunes of Desolation, then you're going to go to froggodgames.com. We'll include a link in the video. Yep. If you want to go and back the Kickstarter for Quests of Doom 3 for 5th edition and Swords of Misery, just go to Kickstarter, type in Quests of Doom 3, and you've got 3 days. Yeah. We've passed our funding goal, and we're just headed toward a couple of stretch goals to add additional content to the game, or to the book. It's right now 6 chapters, 6 adventures. Tom's written 4 of them, and if we make both of our future stretch goals, it'll be a total of 8 chapters, so 8 adventures in there. And the pledges start at $15 for the PDF.
Yeah, $15 for PS, yeah.
Yeah, PDFs are $15, and then it's $32 for the hardcover. And the hardcover are going to be these nice, sturdy books that Frog God produces, and they do not fall apart, unlike some other books that actually. One of them fell apart last night from a certain publisher who shall not be named at our game. We were playing a 5th edition game, and a core rule book fell apart. So you won't get that kind of thing from Frog God Game products. Just
nope,
FYI.
they are made like textbooks. They are made to last a lifetime. So then that's the cool thing about them.
Let me grab something.
All right. Well, I was just going to say, and hopefully you can answer this question if you're hearing me. But here, let me ask you something real quick here. So in the past, when the Kickstarter is over, you're still able to pre-order the book on the Frog God games. In the past, for the other books, they've been able to do that. So I'm assuming if somebody's watching this after the fact, they'll still be able to go and like pre-order the book.
Yeah, through BackerKit, and we should provide a link on the actual Kickstarter page once it's over. So BackerKit allows you to back the project after it's actually ended, but before we've fulfilled. So you've got a few months after that to come in and do your pre-orders. And I wanted to show off the Northlands Saga book.
Mine's right here, but
you've got one?
It's on the bottom of like 17 books. So I can't drag it out right now, but I'm looking at it right here.
It is massive.
Hold that up so you can see like so people can see how thick that book is. That is seriously huge.
So Fields of Blood is a normal sized book. And that's
insane.
The Northland Saga. I mean, it's just crazy. It's over 800 pages, I believe. And like you said, really high quality on the binding, so it's not going to fall apart. Like, fantastic. And I got this in the mail a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh my god, it's so cool.
Yeah. So, all right, well, Tom, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out and just talk and chat. At some point, we got to get that mega group together again, just to pick everybody's brain as far as like D&D and old school D&D comparison to new D&D and whatever. I think it would be great to have both of you, and if we can somehow train Bill how to use his internet and get the rest of them on, I think that would be amazing. So.
Yeah, I'll see what I can organize. I know that everyone's always up for hanging out and talking about adventures, so and the concepts behind adventures and stuff. So I'll see what we can work out, and maybe we just have a roundtable discussion, get together for an hour sometime.
That'd be awesome. All right, well, hey guys, you have a good rest of the night, and if you're interested in playing some awesome adventures, if you're watching this, definitely go check out the Kickstarter and check out the other Quests of Doom book that came before this, and it's chock full of great stuff as well. So. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Right. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thanks.